So how do we become less easy to fool? This is a really important question for me because, again, I'm trying to teach my kids, and I don't want them, most of all, I want them to be critical thinkers. But I think it's interesting. This is a manual from the missionary manual that they gave us when we were going over to China, and I'm going to read a little portion of it here. Through its vast history, China has produced many great thinkers, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and Liang Qichao. However, since the communist takeover China, Marxist doctrine has impacted every facet of society. This pervasive indoctrination process attempted to eradicate any objective understanding of other philosophies and ideas, which ultimately weakened the analytical ability of many Chinese people. This analytical weakness is common among Chinese students, particularly those of the middle and younger generations who are raised and educated under China's communist system. Although many Chinese students may not think of themselves as communists, in reality their thinking pattern and worldview is identical to communism. They will tend to accept certain Marxist doctrines as the only proper way to view the world, such as human beings create and decide human history. Science leads people to truth. That's an awful one. Who would ever want to think that? Religion, especially Christianity, is opium to the people. While many Chinese students will accept these teachings as fact, most know little or nothing about its source, Marxism. Very few have even read anything by Karl Marx, like most Christians have either. Okay. What these students know and believe is that the Chinese government has what the Chinese government has promoted through education and propaganda. Thus, when Chinese students hear about Christianity, their presupposition is that all religions are in essence untrue. Okay, so I was going back through my material that they were used to train us, and I found this passage particularly striking. Because as a missionary, I believe that students were imprisoned to this Marxist ideology without realizing the entire passage could be rewritten to reflect the in-the-box type of thinking that most Christians have about their own faith and their continued misperception about those who differ in their beliefs. And my Chinese students, many of them, if there's anything I want to communicate to you today, it's that many of my students readily accept this shift. They readily accepted this shift in allegiance from one ideology to another ideology without ever really analyzing the ideas or questioning the claims. They were right about that in this passage. They weren't very good at analyzing anything. And they were taught to just accept whatever it was that was told to them was true. It was a problem in China, okay? However, all I was offering them was just a different set of ideas that I was telling them was true, okay? The Christian one maybe seemed hipper or more interesting or more beneficial to them because they might learn English, and some of my students did convert, okay? I'm a classroom teacher. English is obviously my subject, as you can tell. But the last year I've been involved in technology integration work, utilizing iPads in the classroom. And substituting one finally accepted ideology for another is kind of like when I train teachers to integrate iPads in the classroom, and they say, come back to the class, I've done a really cool project, I want you to see it. And I go back and they're like, look, we're making newsletters on the iPad. You know, and it's like, I clearly not communicate to you that substituting one thing for another thing is not what I'm trying to reach at when we're doing technology integration. That's just substitution. Okay, that's not transformation, that's just substitution. And in China, really, that's what my missionary work was, and that is what missionary work in a religious sense is. You're going to areas where people have a fixed, authoritarian view. With whether in China they're atheist, and but their particular way of thinking was authoritarian. Somebody told me to believe it, I trust them and I believe it. So I was just offering them just a different ideology to buy into. Okay. So in the end, I mean, even in technology integration as in worldview, substitution is easy. Thinking differently is not only difficult, but it's uncomfortable, and that's why it's so hard. That's why my Chinese students were willing to become Christians so easily. It really wasn't that different of a way of thinking. Okay? Follow this God, follow this Bible. This is the truth. Okay? It was an easy pill to swallow because it was just a different color. Okay? Same content, just a different color. The ease with which we can acquire information in any place and context, it's startling. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I was on a bus in China with a chicken pecking at me, and I was watching the Atheist Experience. I mean, and I wasn't even allowed to be watching that show, but I got around it by the VPN. So, I mean, it's amazing. Even in China, you can get lots of information. But why did it take me so long to even reach the information that was just so readily available to me? Okay? Why did it take me so long to face the inconsistencies in my faith? In part, the thought process to undo years of indoctrination is a long one. But it is painful. It's really uncomfortable, too. I've lost a lot. I mean, my life is just in shambles in some ways. So I don't want my kids to go through that, but I'm limited in my influence over them. But what I can do is I try to give them some tools of critical and skeptical thinking that I think have influenced me significantly that I found along the way. So here's the things that I try to do with my kids. Because in the end, and I always tell people, I don't have an end goal for my kid. That's like the substitution model. I'm not saying my kids must be atheists. My kids must be non-believers or whatever. I feel most importantly, the only thing that I really want them to be are critical thinkers, skeptical, critical thinkers. That's what I care about. So my kids are little, they're 9, 6, and 4. So these are some of the things I've come up with to just try to foster that in them. Allow and encourage lots of thinking in general. Learn about the brain. I mean, more like the psychology studies that I've been reading. And that's what fascinates me, how our brain is constantly tricking us. Not always a reliable resource. So I have a resource to teach them about the brain, its parts, what each part does, how it works, how it fails us, how little we still know about the brain. I want them to experience new experiences and adventures. Like I said earlier, going to China seemed to have the most impact on me because I think being outside of your comfort zone, being in such a radically different environment, doing something that requires your brain to work harder because you don't have those networks that have already been formed, those shortcuts that can fill in the gaps. So you put yourself in a new environment and your brain has to work harder because it doesn't have all the information. And so it has to work harder to understand everything. And I think in those contexts, you're more capable of thinking differently than you ever were before. So that's why I think that the China experience encouraged me, or led me further along the way of realizing all of the things that were completely untrue about what I believed. So I encourage them to have new experiences, to go different places. They do speak Mandarin still, so I think speaking a second language helps. We do experiments together. And the last one is one important for me as a parent. I want to show my kids that I'm willing to listen and change my mind. That there's new information, not fixed in one state. I don't want them to be fixed in one state. I want them to be people who are willing to grow and learn. Our minds are imperfect and full of bias. I make better decisions when I constantly ask myself, am I clouding the situation, person, article, website, through the lens of my own expectations? The mind, is like a muscle. It's prone to laziness, and the more you use it and get used to thinking critically, the easier it becomes. I think this one is maybe a little bit harder. I think, and it is fostering an attitude of others that is not based on impermanence. Foster an attitude of ourselves and others that is based in impermanence. There's been a lot of research, I'm an educator, about fixed versus growth types of thinking. Has anybody heard of those terms? Okay, yeah, and education is kind of a big thing. Education tends to be trendy, but a fixed mindset assumes that our character, intelligence, and creative ability are static, okay, and that we can't change them in any meaningful way, okay? And it's listed here, but basically it's just sort of idea that, you're given a certain set of skills in life, you're good at this, I'm not, you're good at that, I'm not. The growth mindset, and it refers to intelligence, because a lot of people do have a tendency to think some people are smart, some people are not. Growth mindset thrives on challenge. It sees failure as not evidence of unintelligence, but as a heartening springboard for growth and stretching our existing abilities. And I think this mentality can be applied towards those who are different from us. There have been some psychological studies that have highlighted this as a way to counteract tribalism. In our species, studies done on babies show that very early on, babies prefer people of their own race. And there's just a natural tendency towards in-out categorizations. Later, this extends to appearance, religion, ethnic background, hobbies, and skills. What I've noticed personally in the last couple of years in the atheist community is that we are not immune to these sort of haughty categorizations of who's smart, who's stupid, who's educated, who's uneducated, who's worthy of our respect, who's not worthy of our respect. Like Matt said, all of that, and beliefs are not people, okay? We're not talking about criticizing beliefs, but it's very easy. This is a natural tendency of our brain to be tribalistic. We're the smart ones, they're the stupid ones, okay? So as someone who watches Matt a lot, I want to say I'm not saying that making fun of ridiculous ideas is not only effective but necessary. We're talking about ideas, okay? Ideas and people are different, but it's hard for our brains to separate them, okay? But I do think as a community of skeptics, we should be reminded that people like me, for example, are not fixed in these states of stupidity, ignorance, or irrational thinking. Some of us can and do and will grow through them given the right combination of interest, experience, and knowledge. There was a recent study done by a political scientist out of Dartmouth College about the best method of correcting false information. He chose that anti-vaccination group, which, man, those people were... Okay. He used 4 different approaches, and none of them were effective. Did anybody read this study? None. Not even. In fact, one method of trying to change their mind with information caused the opposite. They just dug their heels in, and more of them refused to vaccinate. So I really hope to see more studies on exactly focusing on what it is that does change people's minds. Okay, in the meantime, though, people's minds do get changed sometimes. I'm an example of it, okay? And it's helpful to consider the person you're debating with, that you're arguing with online, or wherever you're disagreeing with that person, that they are not in a fixed state, okay? And I guess I'm here to remind you of anything, it's that it's true. There are people out there that do change their minds. They come along. And if you have that way of thinking about them, I think you might help separate the person from the idea or the person from the belief. Okay? Though I was only officially employed as a tent maker, missionary twice, for several of the times I was on my own, the missionary mindset pervaded almost every single encounter I had in China. Every Chinese person was a lost soul that needed saving. When I became an atheist, I unconsciously transferred some of that crappy missionary mindset over to the interactions with my religious family and friends. It really took me time and reflection to realize that this approach is unquestionably antithetical to the goals of the larger atheist community. We, as an atheist community, are not missionaries for atheism, okay? That is a terrible mindset, and I'm so glad that I've come through that and I no longer have that attitude. There's really no place for a missionary mindset in the atheist community. The missionary mindset values substitution over transformation in thinking. It aims to affect not how one thinks, but specifically what one thinks. And in the end, what we really want to change is how people think above what people think. If there's any one thing I think we can all agree on, that we want to change how people think, not what people think.